Assalamu alaikum. All right, you guys, inshallah, we're going to get started. Okay. Bismillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. So the title for this session is The Power of a Woman's Spirituality. In today's time and age, it can be exhausting being a woman. There are so many standards to meet, deadlines to reach, pressures to put off, and sometimes at the end of the day, it leaves us overwhelmed and tired. Sometimes you just wonder, how am I going to get through this all? And be a good Muslim too. Then you see an opportunity like the Seerah conference, and you come to regain that spiritual boost and to refuel yourself so that you can keep going, to be in the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to remember the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But perhaps while you've been sitting here, a thought that crossed my mind may have crossed yours. When I would sit and listen to these lectures about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and different Sahaba and compare it to my situation living in today's time and age, I often wondered, we hear about all of these male Sahaba and women who are related to the Prophet ﷺ, like Khadija and Aisha and Fatima radiallahu anhuma, who are all amazing women, and we should all learn their stories inside and out, the men and the women. But sometimes I would wonder, what about women who weren't related to the Prophet ﷺ? What was their relationship like with the Prophet? Were they able to have a close, meaningful relationship with him? Or was it just the men who got to be close to the Prophet ﷺ? So the story I want to share today is about a woman who really stood out to me because she answered that question for me. It gave me some light, some insight into what it was like to be a woman who was balancing so many things in her life, living at the time of the Prophet ﷺ and still able to have a close connection with him. And I thought her story would also be relatable to many here because she went through so many hardships in her life, and some of them might be things that we've gone through ourselves. So the woman whose story that I want to share with you today is of Sulaym bint Milhan, who's also known as Maysa. I found that her stories, I had heard some bits and pieces of them here and there, but it wasn't until I sat down and actually studied and tried to understand her life story myself that I realized that it was all actually puzzle pieces coming together of one amazing woman when you look at it all together. Her love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that fueled her strength in the face of hardship is something that we can all take motivation from. Sulaym was an Ansari woman who became Muslim before the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam moved to Medina. So being Muslim in Medina before the Prophet ﷺ got there meant you were a minority. This wasn't the booming Medina and where the Prophet ﷺ was there and the Muslims were victorious and everyone wanted to be Muslim because that was the cool thing to do, or that's where the power was. Medina at this time was still, the Muslims that were living there were living a very low-key life. However, they still tried to do their best with what they have. The Prophet ﷺ sent people there to go teach them and help them get started. But they did the best with what they had in a time where they hadn't even met the Prophet ﷺ themselves. So even that point alone is something that we can relate to, that they didn't have the Prophet ﷺ living amongst them, but they still tried to hold on to that faith and hold on to love for him, alayhi salatu wassalam. So, in fact, on this note about developing a relationship with Rasulullah ﷺ and not being there with him, one day the Prophet ﷺ was sitting with his Sahaba and he said, I can't wait to meet my brothers and sisters. And they were like, Rasulullah, aren't we your brothers and sisters? And he was like, no, you guys are my companions, but I'm talking about my brothers and sisters, that are coming that haven't even been born yet. And the Sahaba were just like, what do you mean? Like, how are you even going to know them apart? How are you going to know those people? And so, inshallah, when we meet the Prophet ﷺ in Jannah, Rasulullah ﷺ said he'll recognize his ummah by the light that comes out of our faces and out of our limbs from making wudu. So that's just something to think about the next time you make wudu. So now back to the story of Sulaym. When she became Muslim, Sulaym was married to a man named Malik. So as you all know, I mean, a majority of the Sahaba were converts. So she converted while she was married to a man named Malik, and he was actually very unsupportive of her becoming Muslim and tried to make it very, very difficult for her. They had a son named Anas, and he's commonly known as Anas bin Malik, and he actually ended up becoming one of the greatest scholars amongst the Sahaba. So as his mother, as a young boy, as his mother would try to teach him about Islam and this faith that she was still becoming accustomed to, his father, Malik, would tell his mom, you know, stop teaching my son this nonsense. And Sulaym persisted in teaching her son and trying to hold on to that faith regardless of how he was treating her and how difficult he was making it. So Sulaym's sabr and her persistence is something you'll see come up time and time again throughout her story. Just on the note of sabr, I just wanted to point out that a lot of times we translate sabr as patience, and we think about it in terms of a passive kind of just let the storm pass. And while that is the case sometimes, that is the only option you have, majority of the time we do have an option to be active, to do something about our situation, even if it's something little. So while sabr is often translated as just patience, it actually means persistence. So to keep putting up that fight no matter how difficult it is. And that's exactly what Sulaym did with her husband. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rewarded Sulaym for that persistence, but it didn't come easy. What ended up happening with Malik was that he actually went on a business trip one day and he was killed by an enemy, and so he never ended up returning. So, I mean, since at that point, then Sulaym became a single mother raising her son. It may have been a little bit easier for her to hold on to her faith now that she didn't have him pushing against her, but she had a new challenge now of being a single mother. So when Anas was young, you know, she decided that she was just going to focus all of her efforts on trying to help him become the best version of himself. Then one day, as she was raising Anas, again, the Prophet ﷺ hadn't arrived in Medina. And that meant that, but in a couple of years, Rasulullah ﷺ finally did make his way there. So Muslims were highly anticipating him coming and, you know, constantly making preparations and excited to meet the Prophet ﷺ. So you can imagine, you know, when you have a guest, when you have family coming from out of town, you know, when the president came to visit ISB, everyone's like in a frenzy trying to prepare and, you know, welcome their guests. So imagine if you knew the Prophet ﷺ was coming, you know, how excited you would be and what you'd prepare and how you'd want to welcome him. And so amongst those things, people would give the Prophet ﷺ gifts, you know. They would offer him, you know, come stay with us, come live with us, you know, we want to host you for a couple of days. Sulaym was really smart though. What she decided to do was she saw this as a golden opportunity for her son to have the best mentor anybody could ever want. She actually gave her son, I mean, not as like physically give him and never give him back, but she gave her son as a servant to the Prophet ﷺ. So Anas bin Malik became known as Khadim Rasulullah ﷺ. And being the servant of the Prophet ﷺ meant he was there with him everywhere he went. And he was able to learn from his character and everything he did. And it was through that service that he learned so much from the Prophet ﷺ and why he became one of the greatest scholars. So being Anas's close teacher and mentor meant that Rasulullah ﷺ had a special relationship with their family. In fact, he would often go to their house and visit them, and he would even sometimes nap at their place, even though they weren't family. That's how close they became. And it's narrated that when the Prophet ﷺ came to nap, they had a special place in their house for him and a special mat that they would lay down. And when the Prophet ﷺ was taking his afternoon nap and it was really hot in that Arabian sun, he would sweat a little bit. And so when Rasulullah ﷺ was sleeping or when he'd leave, Sulaym, because of her love for the Prophet ﷺ and how much, you know, the Sahaba were so keen on every single little action that the Prophet ﷺ did, everything that came from him, she would actually collect his drops of sweat when he was sleeping and keep that for barakah in their home. So as Islam started to grow in Medina, Sulaym continued raising her son, you know, her life went on. And then one day, one of the most eligible bachelors in the community proposed to Sulaym. His name was Abu Talha. Now Abu Talha was a really wealthy man, charming, you know, he was, you know, well known in his community. He was everything that somebody then would want to be married to. And he really wanted to marry Sulaym. So he came and he proposed to her and he tried to woo her with like the biggest mahr and, you know, tried to do whatever he could to get Sulaym to marry him. And Sulaym refused. And she told him that, you know, while any woman would want to marry you, I can't because I'm Muslim and you're not, and I can't be married to a non-Muslim. So while Allah ended up rewarding her and making things easier for her, she was tested time and time again before that ease came. And so Allah was testing her sincerity. And because she put her relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala over any other relationship, Allah continued to strengthen her and put blessings in her life. So Abu Talha actually ended up accepting Islam in order to marry Sulaym. And it said that that was one of the best mahrs, which was him actually accepting Islam. Now, that's not a thing now, you can't do that. That's not a mahr. But it was accepted at that time because the law, the sharia in our deen grew over time, right? So at that point it was acceptable. And I know that's a controversial issue, you know, like marrying someone, someone converting to marry you, but Abu Talha actually was sincere in his Islam, and he ended up becoming a great Sahabi himself. So these two together were actually what we would call a power couple today. And they understood that holding on to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Prophet and loving Him and trying to be a part of goodness would bring goodness into their life. So one day, the Prophet ﷺ was at the masjid with a bunch of Sahaba, and Abu Talha was amongst them. And you know, a lot of the Sahaba were not very well off, especially, you know, people who had left their lives and left everything to come to Medina. Those Muslims definitely weren't well off because they didn't have anything when they came. And even the Muslims who lived in Medina, they were simple folk, they were farmers, they didn't have very much means. Now that doesn't mean all of the Sahaba were poor, but you know, a lot of them were not very well off. So anyways, they're sitting with the Prophet ﷺ in the masjid, and the Prophet, being in tune with people in his community and knowing what they needed, he realized a lot of them were really hungry. And it wasn't because they forgot their lunch, it was because they were people of little means and they really didn't have anything to eat. So the Prophet asked, is there anyone who can host the Sahaba, you know, can host this gathering? And so Abu Talha immediately jumped on that opportunity for good. And he said, yes, sure, we can host everyone. So Anas, who was also always with the Prophet ﷺ, was in that gathering. So Abu Talha told Anas, his stepson, go home and tell your mom we have some guests coming over. So Anas goes home and he tells his mom, you know, Abu Talha invited basically everyone at the masjid over. And Sulaym pretty much had enough for dinner that night, you know, for their family of a few people. But she did what she could with what she had. So she immediately made some stew, and that was supposed to be enough for a few people. And she was like, this is what I have, you know, I'm doing what I have with what I've got. So when the Prophet ﷺ came, and along with Abu Talha, and she saw how many people were about to come and eat, you know, she was in shock. But the Prophet ﷺ told her, don't worry, and he was really gracious and thankful that they were hosting them, and he told her, I'll serve the guests. So the Prophet ﷺ like kept the lid on the pot, and he would just serve like one scoop, gave each person their serving. And that stew that was supposed to be for a small family of maybe 6 people was enough to feed 70 people. And believe it or not, there is actually more than one, a few narrations about Sulaym and Abu Talha in which they did the same thing, and they, hosting 70 to 100 people at last minute notice, and every single time Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put barakah in what they have. That just goes to show you, when you make a sincere intention and effort to do something to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to do good, Allah helps you in doing that good. Now, the last story I want to share with you all about Sulaym was a story about a son her and Abu Talha had together. They had a young son who got really ill. And so one day after, Sulaym had fed the kids and it was time for them to rest, that son of theirs never woke up, and his sickness took over him. So when Sulaym discovered that her son had passed away, she left him laying where he was as if he was still sleeping. And that night, when Abu Talha came home, he asked, "How's everyone? How's the family? What's going on?" And she told him, the kids are asleep already, and so they had dinner together. She had dinner as normal. They were intimate together that night and just enjoyed each other's company. Now, the next morning when Abu Talha woke up, Sulaym asked him, if someone were to lend you something, wouldn't you give it back? I mean, wouldn't that lender expect to get back what they gave you? And he was like, yeah, of course. I mean, you don't keep what someone gives you. If someone gives you something as a loan, then you return it. And Sulaym said, well, what if I told you that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us a son, but it was time for him to take him back? And as calmly as that, she told Abu Talha about the passing of their son. Now, Abu Talha was not prepared to handle that news, and he got really upset. He went straight to the Prophet ﷺ and he was like, how could she? She didn't even tell me, and he was really worked up about it. And the Prophet ﷺ, knowing how amazing of a woman Sulaym was and how she handled the situation, made dua for them and comforted them. And that night, when they were intimate, they actually conceived of another son. So while Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took one son away from them, He gave them another. Now that might seem kind of hard to believe. It's like, okay, nice barakah soup story and all of that, but your son passing and you just like barely react. So how is it that someone can have that much calmness in the face of something so difficult? Like, shouldn't she be crying, So the same way that Sulaym was able to get through difficulty in her life, we all have that ability to do the same. We have the capacity to transform our lives and the people around us through having a strong connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is what will get you through anything. It's what will keep you sane and what will keep you grounded in this society, in all of the difficulties that we're facing and everything that's pulling you from one end of the earth to another. And it's not so much what you're going through, but it's your mentality while you're going through that challenge is what will put you through, and where your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes in. The Prophet ﷺ went through so much adversity in his life. What we just described about Sulaym times 100. Yet he was the most giving person on the face of the earth. So it's not impossible to have that capacity to love and to give and to work through whatever you're going through. So although the challenges we face seem like they're all here just to they seem like they're in our lives to make us crazy, it's actually the perfect opportunity to bring us close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In the same way that the Sahaba were trailblazers of their time, and we benefit from every single thing that they did and what they went through and all of their sacrifice, we have that opportunity in our time and place right now to be that for someone else. And alhamdulillah, so many of us are benefiting from people in this community who did put in hard work and sacrifice, those that we know of and those who came before. But the way the Muslim community is moving in America, things are moving fast, right? There's so many opportunities that are still at hand. There's so many things that we can still do to be trailblazers in our community. So, just some inspiration that we can take from Sulaim and her family and how they live their lives is, when you try your best to help Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and help His deen and aid His deen, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala helps you. And He will give you that capacity to continue to be giving as long as you're thankful and you continue to do good. So now some practical steps of, I kept saying get close to Allah, get close to the Prophet ﷺ. So what are some practical steps to do that? So one of them is education. Alhamdulillah, you guys are here and you're here to learn. And that shows that you guys are making a sincere effort, that you want to consistently, renew that relationship and learn more about the Prophet ﷺ. And I encourage you after this conference, don't let this be the end of it. There are so many resources in terms of books to read, podcasts to listen to, and you should definitely try to familiarize yourself with that material. Or if there's some other subject that you want to learn more about to strengthen your deen, continue to do that. And the best way to learn is to do something consistent. Ideally with a teacher, and a teacher in person, but if not, then at least online, right? And a lot of times, we think about what opportunities we don't have and we wish we had. But there are so many gyms in our community that we actually can and should take advantage of, because you never know how long they'll be around. So just like you all heard Sheikh Maryam speak yesterday, there is Sheikh Aisha Prime, who's not too far away from this community, Humaira Baji, who teaches Quran. Although these women might be humble and might not speak about their accomplishments and what they've learned and what they did, there's so much that you can benefit from them, and definitely take advantage of that. The next point would be to just constantly try to improve your relationship with Allah, whether that's a small reflection like last night they spoke about, just having alone time with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or whether it's just, on your morning commute, make that time for your dhikr, or listening to some podcast. Try to do something consistent where you're always growing in your relationship with Allah. And finally, stick to people who remind you of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When we're in school and college, that's easier because there's MSAs, there's, organizations that are made just for that. But if you feel like there's a lack of that in your community, then you should be the one to start that, because more often than not, there are so many other people who are in the same boat, who want the same thing. So I would just encourage you, whether it's, you might feel like, oh, I need somebody who's more knowledgeable or something, but you can even start with just reflecting on Quran together. Take a passage at a time. So I'll leave you all with a hadith that I think summarizes some of the main points that we talked about. One of my favorite hadith. عن ابن عباس رضي الله عنهما قال كنت خلف رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يوما. So one day, Ibn Abbas, who was a young Sahabi, was riding with the Prophet ﷺ. He was traveling with him, and he was sitting in the back of the Prophet ﷺ. So the Prophet ﷺ turned to him and said, فقال يا غلام إني أعلمك كلمات. I'm going to teach you something, and hold on to it. احفظ الله يحفظك. Hold on to your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah will take care of you. احفظ الله تجده تجاهك. Take care of your relationship with Allah, and you'll find Him always there, facing you, ready, ready to listen to you, ready to help you. إذا سألت فاسأل الله. If you're ever going to ask of anyone, ask Allah. وإذا استعنت فاستعن بالله. And if you're ever going to seek help from someone, make it Allah that you seek help from. وَاعْلَمْ أَنَّ الْأُمَّةَ لَوْ اجْتَمَعَتْ عَلَىٰ أَن يَنْفَعُوكَ بِشَيْءٍ. And know, if the entire world, if the whole ummah gathered together to benefit you with something, لم ينفعوك إلا بشيء قد كتبه الله لك. They would not be able to benefit you with anything except for what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had already written for you. وإن اجتمعوا على أن يضروك بشيء, and if they all gather together to try to hurt you or to do something against you, لم يضروك إلا بشيء قد كتبه الله لك. They would not be able to harm you in any way unless it was something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had already written was going to happen to you. رفعت الأقلام وجفت الصحف. The pens have been lifted and the pages have been dried. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم إنه هو الغفور الرحيم.